Well, hello, all you shiny, happy people. 'Tis the Reverend. Who would have thunk it? All right, so we're going to continue today with what's left. Is there? Is it what's left? Will this be the end? No, there will be one more. One more after this one in Haunted Spaghetti before we move on. So, this particular story right here, it appeared in the B.O. Blankenship anthology, Shut Up and Bleed. It was a Western horror anthology. It was like super awesome. Pardon me. And it's now in Haunted Spaghetti. So, this is called Hellfire and Blood. And this is gruesome, not gonna lie. But if you've made it this far, I'm sure you can handle it. Okay. This is another kind of Old West period story. It also deals with coyote, which is a very mischievous spirit that some of you may read about in my story Moss Spaghetti in the most recent anthology Tumblebleed. All of my stuff takes place in the same world. It's all connected somehow. This takes place in the not mythical town of Black Cat Thicket. It was actually a place. It's no longer there. I think it's a golf course now. But Black Cat Thicket was an actual place with a hellacious history that my father's side of the family kind of, I guess, ruled way back in the gap a couple generations ago. Yeah, it's a golf course now, but in honor of my Texas roots, you know, I will be bringing Black Cat Thicket back to life in future things as well. But enough of that. Let's get started here. And this is a long one. You might want to break it up. I won't. I'll keep going, but you might. So, Hellfire and Blood. Fire. I see it as both a curse and a blessing since the day the good Lord bestowed it upon us with his infinite wisdom. We use it to heat our lives during periods of winter, cook our meals during times of hunger, and to dispose of bodies during times of mourning. Then again, a blessing to one man is often a curse upon another. God is funny like that, and those jokes come in various shapes, forms, and familiarities. I thought I met God once in the form of a machine symbolizing the answer to all my prayers. The men who owned this monster christened it the Colonel James Fannin. Granted, that Fannin man was one of the biggest jokes of the Texas Revolution. He couldn't even die successfully. He asked the Mexicans to spare his face so his family could look upon him at the funeral, and instead they bashed it in without a second thought. Poor bastard, I guess. Some would say we can smell our own. Colonel James Fannin was a narrow-gauge steam engine that ran the Red River Express route. A 260, meaning the locomotive had 2 guide wheels, 6 drivers, and 0 tailing. It was built by the Baldwin Company of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was the pride of Greenville, Texas, that hauled bales of cotton from the gins to the barges along the Red River. The powers that be failed to tell their fans and investors that the money they saved by building a slower, cheaper, and smaller narrow-gauge railway lined the pockets of the whip masters rather than the slaves who built it. Yes, slavery was abolished almost 2 decades ago, but was it really? It all depends on where you look and who you ask. Don't be around an Irishman when he's had his fill of whiskey, if you don't want to know all about the fair-skinned man's burden. My name is Jacobia Childress, and this is my story. At least I think it is. I'm not so sure anymore. Tiny bits and pieces of my life have been nothing more than a blur as of late, and I'm not entirely sure the deeds performed during such absences are my fault. Still, they'll say it was me, all the same. I don't think there's anyone left who will even vouch for my side of things when the law gets here. I'm a murderer, plain and simple. The clues to that truth lay in bubbling puddles at my feet, boiled and scorched from the firebox heat. My wife, Victoria, and my daughter, Honey, can attest to that. Although I don't recall all that well, I'm sure poor old Franklin Harbour and Donnell Wolfe can claim the same. A man will do desperate things when faced with the potential absence of shelter, sustenance, and status. The 3 S's of life in the year 1882 are hard to come by. But that old cotton baron Cornelius Park swore he had the answer to all of them. If you were of the darker persuasion, you could go and sweat away in his fields until your hands bled and your feet ached. It didn't matter what old Honest Abe said at the end of the war. You were still property to Mr. Parks, and he treated you as such. Punishment and pay alike. He wasn't beyond giving the order for one of his mindless underlings to crack the whip on you either. I listened to them doing so while parked beside his loading dock, hopelessly trying to keep a low fire in old Fannin. The lower the fire, the less water used, and the more time his back-broken army could take loading the handful of boxcars between me and the conductor's caboose. Fire is truly the key to everything, you see, including my aforementioned downfall. That all happened on the night I met Coyote. We'll get to him in a moment. I ran this line between Greenville and Elwood so many times over the last year that I don't even need to look out the window anymore while steaming this bastard down the rails. I know every bump and grade, turn and trestle. South from the roundhouse to the cotton gin at first light. To the barges along the river and back home before supper time in the comfortable confines of Black Cat Thicket. I don't recall the last time anything felt like home, whether that be my warm bed, my wife's loving arms, or my own child's innocent smile. No, I've known nothing but these goddamn gauges and injector knobs for what feels like an eternity. Balance, they told me, was the secret to success. I cheated my way to that balance, and I've been paying the ultimate price a little bit at a time. Worst of all, the final payment is due, and I'm staring down the finality of the banker's barrel. Don't worry, it's not a cowardly pistol or anything of that nature. That would be too fucking easy for the likes of me. The authorities and the few of the locals are screaming at me from beyond the roundhouse door, but I can't quite make out what they're saying. I'm certain it's somewhere along the lines of "step outside with your hands up," or even the silliest of all promises, "just open up and no one will get hurt." No, you can't inflict damage to the damaged, my friends, and I am far beyond fixing. My only choice at this point is to release the brakes, barrel through the doors, and begin what's destined to be the most ignorant run for freedom in the history of railroading. It's not like you can steer a train, after all. My would-be captors would wait along the tracks and open fire as I passed by, putting an end to what the newspapers would call the Great Black Cat Massacre, once and for all. History would dissect the ending of my tale from now until the end of time. What they'd never pinpoint would be exactly how this nightmare started. No, Only 2 individuals know of that origin, but only one of us is human. We change. It's a time jump. Almost 1 year before. "The hill!" screamed Franklin. "Watch the goddamn hill!" "I'm trying," I pleaded. "I'm doing the best I can do with the tools provided." Frustrated to the point of nausea, I reached beside the locomotive's firebox and opened both the water and steam injector valves. I immediately pulled my hands back after yet another round of stinging pain. I was destined to remember the heat which accompanied such actions, but today was not that day. "Gloves, genius," sighed the engineer. "I swear to all that is holy you've been making these same mistakes over and over again for nearly 2 weeks. How many more times do I need to remind you about firing? Steam is a luxury. Water is a necessity. If you expose that crown sheet on the boiler too long when we're climbing the hill out of the South Sulphur River Valley, you're going to blow us all over the countryside." I know, I responded like a scolded puppy. "I'll do better tomorrow, I promise." "Ha!" Franklin laughed. "If you keep firing the Fannin like this, there won't be a tomorrow for you. Me or Donnell back there in the caboose. We might even take a few of those cattle over there in that field with us. That'd be a nice surprise for everyone in Black Cat Thicket, wouldn't it? Sure, they'd have to attend some funerals, but imagine the free food to follow." With that bit of humor out of the way, we pulled the engine inside the roundhouse and began to shut her down. Yes, it was named after James Fannin, but all manners of boats, trains, and guns were treated like and formally addressed as female. I never bothered to ask why. I just went with it. No one around these parts would probably know the real reason anyhow. Her coal smoke filled the rafters above the stack and began to choke me out a bit. Donnell Wolfe, the conductor for the Red River Express, had failed once again to open both sets of doors on the northern and southern sides of the structure. The building was less of a roundhouse and more of a wide tunnel with rails from the main line extending all the way through. This was convenient since we were the only narrow-gauge train who used the tracks. At the end of the day, we could stop her, put her to sleep, and carry our tired feet home in time for supper. Between the walls and the tracks were every type of tool and fabrication machine known to mankind at this point. Old Man Parks didn't spare any expense maintaining his polished image with the general public. But on the infrastructure of the entire operation in general, normal gauge railroaders laughed at us behind our backs. It was something I'd gotten used to. I climbed back into the cab of the Colonel James Fannin and watched the fire's embers die for what seemed like hours. Being the fireman of the railroad, and an obviously poor one at that, my job didn't end until all sparkle ceased in the firebox. Franklin Harbor and Donnell Wolfe, the engineer and the conductor of this outfit, called them candles. I think the 2 of them were probably born on the running board of this train, used the tender as a baby crib, and cut their teeth on dirty old coal. They knew everything about railroading you'd ever want to hear, and I was envious. It was a damn respectable job if you could keep it. Personally, I wasn't sure how much longer they planned on putting up with my failures. I met my wife Victoria in the fall of 1880. I was walking back from the South Sulphur River after doing a bit of fishing, and she was harvesting pecans in a nearby orchard. I was so taken by how incredibly beautiful she was, I slammed head first into the closest pecan tree like a damn fool. She laughed as my nose snapped at the bridge, and I bloodied my clothes, my fish, and the leafy surroundings along the ground. The angel could not restrain her giggles as she sopped up the crimson flow with a handkerchief. I could smell a mixture of lavender and orchard soil from her hand through the cloth, even with my still pouring injury. For me, it was love at first sight. For her, I was the first man, including her own father, who'd ever made her laugh rather than cry. We were married within a month. Luckily, all our church friends and family pitched in and helped us build a house right on the main thoroughfare of Black Cat Thicket. Sure, the place wasn't much but a general store, a church, a schoolhouse, and the cotton train roundhouse, but it was home. Only a dozen more homestead structures lined the strip before civilization slipped back into the northeast Texas forest and bramble fields, but it was quite comfortable. Then the expenses began piling up. I could always fish the river for food and cut wood for fire in the trees surrounding the thicket, but a young woman of no more than 18 years of age had worldly wants. I mean, if her poor idiot husband couldn't satisfy these wants, there were more than enough slick fellas in good old Greenville, Texas, right down the road, who could. Since I wasn't equipped for or desiring a life in the big city like that, I figured it was damn well time I got me a good-paying job to keep my lady happy. That was right about when I noticed the Help Wanted sign nailed to the roundhouse door on my way home from Porter's Market. I didn't know what a railroad fireman was at the time, but I intended on learning with a quickness. Come to find out, there's nothing quick about it. And we do a time jump. Hello, love. Tough day on the railroad? Of course it was a tough fucking day. Granted, I'd never say that to my own wife, but those words plopped down comfortably on the tip of my tongue and taunted me for resisting. I hugged Victoria as tightly as I could without smearing too much of the coal and oil from my clothing all over her dress. It's not like she had a closet full of those things. Rich in love, poor in the pocket. That was the Childress family motto. Same as always, I sighed. I try everything I can to make Mr. Harbor happy, but he never has anything nice to say to me. He screams at me all day for almost blowing us to smithereens. Well, I could see where that would be a problem, Jacobia. Nobody wants to get blown to smithereens, dear husband. At least not until they've managed to solidify some type of wealth for their family to carry on in their absence. Victoria smiled behind her hand, knowing all too well that I wasn't exactly in the mood for joking, but I could easily see her cheekbones screaming for attention. I smiled back at her instinctively, the sparkle in her eye erasing every hint of meanness that old bastard Harbor fed me from the engineer's seat all day. She knew exactly how to ease my pain. It would be humanly impossible to love this woman any more than I already did. Undeserving perfection for the fool who stood before her. There's a plate of ham and biscuits still hot on top of the stove for you, my love, Victoria continued. Then you can take those nasty work clothes off and pile them up on top of the other washing. I fancy a bit of little Jacobia after you've had a proper scrub. Victoria winked as she walked by me, and all the blood from my body headed straight into the direction of my groin. I wasn't sure if it was the remnants of her family's Irish accent that did it to me or the way she purposely wiggled when she walked. Either way, that woman knew exactly how to get underneath my skin. I couldn't wait to get inside of hers. Food, filth removal, and fucking in that exact order was what I planned to do. Sometime after that, I'd work on falling asleep so I could get the next round of near-death experiences started. Goddamn train. I tucked a thin slice of honey ham between the warm pillows of one of Victoria's famous biscuits and took a bite. I swore I could taste the buzz of every bee in Black Cat Thicket responsible for its creation. I knew this little town wasn't much to someone from Greenville or Clarksville, but it was home to me. Closing my eyes as I chewed, I sensed the scents of honeysuckle on the autumn breeze sneaking in through an open window. Suddenly, the orgasmic bouquet of smells was slapped away from the unwanted invasion of reeking coal fire from the nearby roundhouse, and I was immediately jolted unpleasantly into the here and now. I couldn't seem to forget about the Colonel James Fannin no matter how hard I tried, day or night, asleep or awake. With my meal ruined, with my meal ruined, I moped like a defeated soldier to the bath Victoria poured for me in the next room. Snapping the clasp from my still new but already entirely ruined overalls, I let the denim fall to the floor with a thump of wadded failure. I sank into the steaming water and closed my eyes to the world around me. That was right about the time when a tiny, stealthy hand accompanied my descent and grasped me gently around the part of my body which begged for the most attention. I jerked suddenly out of surprise and habit, but Victoria shushed me tenderly, signaling that it was my turn to relax. Slowly she stroked my manhood up and down as the biggest smile so far crept across my face. Then she spoke. I know things are hard. Yes, they are, I toyed with her. That's not what I'm talking about, Victoria commanded. But you're correct, sir. Habitually, this was the point of our marriage when Victoria brought up disturbing or shocking bits of news. You must admit, it's a great way to break the ice. Those magic fingers of her could inform me that the rest of the house was on fire, and I wouldn't worry myself. Not as long as I knew I'd be snuggling up next to that beauty in the moonlight as the night progressed. She meant everything to me. Like I was saying, I know things are hard, but you've never not found a way to make it happen yet. Chances are that everything will snap into place like it's supposed to, and you'll be the best damn locomotive fireman this side of Cornelius Vanderbilt. For a second, a small drop of blood left my... What? Oh, okay. Ooh, I was like, what in the hell did I just write? Boy, that's bad. For a second, a small drop of blood left my cock and swam toward my brain, sparking a contradictory, rational thought. I don't think Cornelius Vanderbilt ever got his hands dirty, Victoria. As a matter of fact, my wife interrupted, disagreements have a tendency to make young wives not want to get their hands dirty either. She squeezed me with every bit of wrist strength she had as her voice heightened to a crescendo. Sexual electricity formed somewhere in the vicinity of my feet and traveled instantly to the head of my penis, polluting my bathwater with steams of milky semen. I relaxed instantly to prepare myself for the inevitable escapades destined to follow. I don't know how you do it, my love, I whispered as I gently stroked her cheek with still tingling fingers. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a complaint, but you've been riling me up so much lately, I'm amazed we don't already have a house full of babies screaming for our attention. It was at that moment when Victoria placed her hand in mine and held it tight against her chest. I could feel her heartbeat quicken as the words struggled to leave her worried mouth. Slowly, she pushed my hand lower and lower, but stopping a few inches before reaching directly where I hoped this little foreplay event was heading. Yeah, Victoria leaned over and whispered into my ear. About that. And then we have a time jump. A deep darkness seemed to fall in Black Cat Thicket, making my usual path from home to the roundhouse more difficult to traverse. Granted, it was nearing the midnight hour, and I wasn't necessarily supposed to be inside the structure. Sorry. Pages stuck together, but not for the reason you're thinking. There we go. Without permission. I needed some time to myself. I looked upon the quiet locomotive with both hope and hatred. It was the key to my family's financial future, but it failed to bend to my will whenever I needed it most. It was though it possessed some type of personal vendetta against me and only me. The engineer Franklin Harbor had no issue swiping me out of the way like discarded rubbish and performing my fireman duties along with his engineering skills simultaneously. He obviously had the gift of time in office on his side, because he made it look all too easy. Time wasn't a luxury anymore. Victoria ceased to receive her cycle's course almost 3 whole months ago and failed to bring it to my attention. I knew damn well that she knew, though. How could she not? Do you mean to tell me that a lady doesn't know when there's something unusual going on within her own body? I may have been born at night time, but it wasn't tonight, and it wasn't last night either. If she'd been searching for the exact moment to spring this little smidgen of information upon me, she had found it in my weakest of states. I was breathing nothing but fear inside my own desperate hour. I was brought back into the moment by a rustle of oil containers on the other side of the colonel. "Oh, Jacobia, it's you," slurred a relieved Chief Black Cat. For a moment there, I thought the soldiers finally found me. What a relief. Chief Black Cat was the last remaining member of the local tribe, which no longer existed. Everyone in the community took turns shielding him from the search parties attempting to relocate the natives to the reservations across the Red River. In turn, he would do all kinds of odd jobs for everyone to stay fed and secluded. He was born in the South Sulphur River bottoms, after all. Who in hell had true authority to remove him from his birthplace? Still, like tonight, he was often deep in his liquor and sometimes difficult to deal with. It was the double-edged sword of being a true Christian man, I guess, and one we unanimously decided to accept as the town burden. No one was even sure if he was indeed a chief of anything. He sat beside me. Y'all hear the sounds of Dallas outside? Sirens, man. It's like Dallas mating call. All right. He sat beside me as a strong waft of cheap bourbon penetrated my nostrils. It took everything I had to hold back the half-digested dinner that rose up my throat. My nerves were so jangled that it was quite a task. I tried my best. "So," Chief Black Cat continued, "what brings young Jacobia Childress into the Red River Express roundhouse at such a late hour?" I countered his inquiry with my own. What brings a fugitive Indian chief into the Red River Express roundhouse at such a late hour? The conductor, Mr. Wolf, said I could sleep here tonight, since the patrols are in the area. He was also kind enough to gift me this bottle of whiskey. He's such a nice man. Really? Did the two of us know the same Donnell Wolf? That jackass knew everything about this locomotive, yet chose to sit on his posterior in the caboose while I sweat balls inside a roaring fire. He wasn't willing to offer me up any helpful advice either. It was as though he wanted me to fail, and the fireman before me, and the fireman before him. Folks love wallowing in the misfortune of others. Still, he gave this old Indian a place to sleep and a bottle of whiskey. Made me wonder what he requested in return. "I work here, Chief, remember?" "Fair enough, Mr. Childress, fair enough. But what really brings you to the Red River Express roundhouse at such a late hour? Woman problems? Having trouble getting Little Chief to stay stiff? I can help with that, you know. The magic of my people has been known to cure many—" I cut him off mid-drunken sentence. "When you say the magic of your people, do you mean real magic, or am I supposed to chew on some old roots and pray for luck?" Chief Black Cat appeared both confused and leery at the same time. I could tell I'd possibly scratched the surface of something ancient in his tired, intoxicated brain. A half-smile spread across one side of his face, but disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Whiskey does strange things to a man, often stealing their ability to keep secrets. I hoped he was on the verge of revealing the biggest one his people ever knew. He straightened up and began speaking with his most serious tone, trying to quash the fire water's toxin. Luck always comes at a price, Jacobia Childress. When you claim what the white man calls luck upon someone, you're stealing that positive energy from all living things around you. Energy, whether positive or negative, is never created and it never dies. It moves from one being to the next. Are you willing to take that chance, white man? Are you willing to steal the good fortune of others to cure what ails your troubled soul? I thought hard in the face of pending conflict. I'm not quite sure what the old fugitive bastard meant, but I knew it couldn't be all that bad. If it truly harmed anyone, then I couldn't see why Chief Blackcat would offer it up in the first place. Maybe he was hesitant to let pale-faced Jacobia Childress in on his people's heritage, or perhaps he was blowing smoke up my ass. Drunken people tend to do that, after all. Regardless, I was destined to be a father in the next 6 months or so, and I needed to get my life into high gear. A little bad luck for a few people was a small price to pay when lifelong success was on the line. Yes, I am. And we have a time jump. Jacobia, why have you brought us here? Who are these men at the church talking to Reverend Davis? To be honest, I didn't exactly know what to say to her. When word reached me that Texas Rangers bunked down in the church, I knew for certain they'd come to investigate the disappearances. I couldn't help but think I'd been sloppy at some point, and it wouldn't take long at all for their hound dog noses to seek me out. There weren't many men to choose from in Black Cat Thicket, and the process of elimination would begin at first light. All I knew was that me and mine needed to be as far away when the sun peeked its keen eye over the morning horizon. I brought Victoria and our daughter Honey to the only safe place I truly knew. The smell of coal fire still lingered strong from the day's cotton run to Elwood. Victoria seemed offended by the harsh air, but it was heavenly to me. After all, me and old Colonel Fannin had become quite close over the previous year. That locomotive could do no wrong as long as I was in control, and I hoped it felt the same way about me. If anything could prevent me from the gallows, it was indeed this machine. I ascended a ladder to the loft below the roundhouse rafters with my daughter in tow. I motioned for Victoria to follow, but I could sense she wasn't in the most trustworthy of moods. She proceeded with caution to our level and sat atop the makeshift bed once reserved for Chief Blackcat, or any other friend of the railroad who needed a place to sleep it off. Mr. Harbor was a good man when it came to such things. Not necessarily many other traits to brag about, but he was kind to others in desperate need. Not to me personally, mind you, but others. I hope he rests in peace. I'm in trouble, Victoria, I pleaded. I've done terrible things, and we need to get as far away from this place as possible. What kind of terrible things? She inquired further, grasping my arm in desperation as I paced uncontrollably. That was it. I'd pretty much done all the terrible things. It would have been a shorter list if I'd named off the handful of socially acceptable things I'd done over the past year. I didn't want to tell her, but most of the previous year was a blur to me. There were mornings when I would snap out of it somewhere between the thicket and Greenville, giving old Colonel Fannin everything I had. Sorry. I'm going to use this little pause to take a drink. There we go. I didn't want to tell her, but most of the previous year was a blur to me. There were mornings when I would snap out of it somewhere between the thicket and Greenville, giving old Colonel Fannin everything I had. Other days, I'd fade back into reality, right smack dab in the middle of supper. Hell, Victoria would kill me good and proper if I told her I was all blanked out when Honey was born. I truly was, But it wasn't my fault. Was it? And then we time jump back. How you like this Quentin Tarantino style of writing? Chief Black Cat said words on that fateful night that I couldn't even begin to translate. It was as though a beast from the bowels of Hades took over his voice, because I was damn certain it wasn't his own. After a quiet spell, the old Indian sucked the whiskey bottle that he'd been holding in his hand the entire time dry. When he lit a small fire with a book of matches he'd found on the locomotive's cab window. That was the moment when shit turned even stranger. The old man blew the whiskey from his mouth into the firebox, and the flames jumped to lick every already charred roundhouse ceiling. Oh, the already charred roundhouse ceiling. Even though I was temporarily blinded from the sudden and intense heat, I could swear I witnessed the figure of a man walk from the base of the fire up the grab iron stairs and into the firebox itself. I shook my head at the impossible feat, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me in the darkness. Perhaps shadows from the native trickery, or my brain leading me wrong from a spot of bad meat at supper. Without an ounce of effort on my part, the locomotive's fire came to life. Steam escaped from every orifice of his iron frame, responding like I'd been working with her for hours. Then, pulsating streams of blinding light illuminated the air surrounding the engine as though it were possessed by the most ungodly of creations mentioned in whispers during the cryptic parts of the Bible. If I didn't know any better, and I truly didn't at the time, I would have sworn what I'd witnessed was from another world. I turned to throw a barrage of questions into Chief Black Cat's face, only to see him stumble to his knees, grabbing his chest futilely, desperately attempting to clutch his physical form together. The old native fell to the hard ground and rapidly burst into flames. Had he somehow torched himself from the inside out by ingesting the whiskey? That answer could be forever out of reach, since his corpse continued to burn into nothingness. There wasn't even a pile of ashes to bury. Bad for his loved ones, if any, but good for the man who would eventually be looked upon for an explanation. All went dark in the Red River Express roundhouse once again, and I passed out shortly after. I awoke the next morning safe in bed, with Victoria waking me for work. The coffee didn't come anywhere near clearing my mind. I was a fire god from that moment on. The Colonel James Fannin strained its eccentrics and pistons, normally between 55 and 60 miles per hour on straight track, but the RRE route was filled with curves. On top of that, the climb in and out of the South Sulphur River Valley took every puff of steam even the best fireman could muster from her boiler. I had the locomotive blowing through the Black Cat Thicket roundhouse at nearly 100 miles per hour on the next afternoon, and blew a few of the structure rafters off in the process. The conductor screamed at the top of his lungs at me when he finally stopped to load the barges in Elwood. It was a good day, at least until the voices began. They came on as unintelligible mumblings at first, causing headaches and failed memories at the most inconvenient of times. I had old man Parks at the Greenville gym believing my head problems were brought on from being overworked by Engineer Harbor. In the end, it didn't matter. He was getting his money from the cotton barges daily, and if I could keep that iron demon smoking at higher speeds, we could eventually begin making a second trip. More trips meant more profit. Cornelius Parks was a damn happy man. Mr. Harbor agreed. The fireman was the most important member of the railroading team, after all. Without a good fireman, the engineer couldn't properly do his job. In return, if the engineer was powerless, the rich old man who owned the cotton field couldn't get his goods to the river. To put it bluntly, the entire Greenville cotton industry was resting solidly atop my shoulders. Everything I'd ever needed was finally within my grasp. Truth be known, the entire job was an act. The turning of the water knobs and the adjustments I'd made to the fire mid-run were all an illusion. Engineer Harbor was so impressed with my newly acquired skills that he didn't even bother pulling his head from the window to check on my progress. I'm sure the breeze stirred up by our overgrown bullet was quite enjoyable at the speeds I achieved. When he did pay attention, I often pretended to do things. That was the luck Chief Black Cat warned me about before his own luck had coincidentally run out that night in the roundhouse. His misfortune was inconsequential to my success. That is until those jumbled whispers became clear, intelligent conversations. I was sitting atop the tender's coal stack one afternoon, waiting for the candles in the firebox to burn out. In that moment, a profound voice bellowed from the deepest bowels of the engine's boiler. It immediately brought me back to the Indian's demise. At exactly what point do you plan on fulfilling your portion of the bargain, Master Childress? Asked the invisible presence. Bargain? I replied. From that moment on, the locomotive referred to itself as Coyote. Apparently that drunkard taking refuge in my workspace failed to explain the next steps in the process. Sure, I could blame the fact he fell over dead mere moments after coaxing me into playing with magic and spitting fire into the ethereal plane, but I'm normally not one for pointing fingers. As my previously mentioned luck would traditionally have it, the old locomotive was using the term master loosely when referring to its fireman. I was definitely the slave in the relationship. Flesh and blood was all it craved to keep me looking dapper, and flesh and blood it received. On an average of once a week, the fire in the box would dwindle, and the chorus in my head would sing the hymn of the macabre. That's when the blackouts happen the most, when I refuse the locomotive's bidding. To keep my own life and the lives of my family happy, I had to steal breath from others. This soon became the Childress family curse I hoped wouldn't transfer to the shoulders of future generations. If I was lucky, I could find a way to somehow unbound myself as soon as I could save enough money after Honey's birth. Then again, when is it ever enough, regardless of what the it in your world may be? It started out as drifters from Oklahoma who used the tracks as a wayfinder from the Red River to the dark soil of Greenville. I'd offer them safety inside one of the empty boxcars and guarantee them a meal and a dry place to sleep in Black Cat Thicket. In the mornings, I would send them on their way to their dream destination before the cotton loaders arrived at the docks. The only problem was that those mornings never arrived. Yes, this was a problem for the hopeful drifter, who fell for my trickery. Not for me. No, my only real problem with the whole deal was the chopping and slicing which came with the territory. Being a narrow-gauge steam locomotive, its firebox was much smaller than those belonging to the more traditional engines. A man's head could fit inside easily, if need be, but the shoulders were a different story altogether. Unfortunately, those firebox walls didn't stretch to accommodate such blockades like those of women's birth canals. This is where many a night in solitude come into play with my trusty woodsman axe. After a dozen or so, the screams, the squirming, the sight of blood no longer bothered me. Nothing in this world, no matter how grotesque, was too difficult for my wife and baby. They deserved nothing but the best. Then, one night, Donnell Wolfe forgot his lucky pocket knife in the caboose. That was unfortunate. I don't think he knew what to believe at first, nor did he see the axe blade looming for his forehead in the darkness. I'd hit him with the dull end, of course. Blood cleanup is a little too difficult on a parched northeast Texas dirt floor. No, I knocked him clean out, dragged him to the banks of the South Sulphur River, and let the slow-flowing waters do the rest. Like cleaning a fish, only bigger. When the sun rose and he didn't show up to work, Most thought he'd taken off to Mexico or somewhere else far away with Chief Black Cat. The fact that both men had a bit of a gambling problem didn't make it sound too unbelievable. Everyone must cash out eventually. When the cotton baron, Cornelius Parks, caught wind of our bit of trouble, he granted me and Mr. Harbor permission to keep running without a conductor. Shutting down until we could find a proper man for the caboose of the train was completely out of the question, especially since we were making 2 runs per day, dawn till dusk. I'm going to pause just for a second. Okay. Sorry. Sure, I could edit this out, but somebody needs to remind the internet about imperfections. Life is not perfect. And I'm not an influencer. I'm using quotation fingers. Don't be influenced by me. Okay. The old rich bastard had already bought him a second house in the bustling town of Greenville, and a third, smaller one was being built near the cotton gin for his not-so-secret mistress. We turned the other cheek and kept on railroading, at least until the next incident occurred. I awoke one afternoon after returning from another memory lapse to find myself on the banks of the river once more. This time, the subject matter was a bit too flat to be someone I'd smacked over the head and dragged there. When I flipped the carcass over, it was none other than the engineer, Franklin Harbor. The voice in my head attempted to convince me he'd taken a bit of a tumble out of the cab and down to the summer drought-ridden rocky bed of the same river in which I stood. Looking up, I could see Colonel Fannin sitting along the trestle, smoking proudly as though it knew feeding time was on the way. There was nothing I could do other than cut the poor old man to pieces and feed the evil entity who claimed mine and my family's meal ticket. That's exactly what I did. For the next 2 weeks, I performed all 3 jobs along the railroad, and I didn't bat an eye at the increased workload. Sure, I was a tad slower by myself, but the job was still getting done. Mr. Parks began to ask too many questions, and that's exactly why he was the next to go. The only problem was that the old man rarely stepped outside of his office at the Greenville Gin, so I had to hit him when he was on his way to work one morning. Yes, I literally hit him with the train. The dock workers screamed for me to stop, but it's a loud existence inside of a steam locomotive. There's lots of ways to ruin somebody's day if they're not paying attention when they cross over these tracks. Even more when you can't comprehend what those broken-back idiots are saying to you. Then you have to back up to ask them, move forward, back up, and ask them again, move forward, etc. There wasn't much left of old Cornelius by the time I understood what they were trying to tell me. I quick blow down of scalding water and steam. Oh yeah. I quick blow down of scalding water and steam from the boiler cleansed that mess right up. I kept Coyote happy, and Coyote blessed me with a rich family life in return. It was all I'd ever wanted. The bad thing about the cotton gin incident was that some of those dock workers thought I was doing it all on purpose. I mean, I was, but they didn't know that. I believe they may have exaggerated their stories a bit when the Texas Rangers rode into the area to investigate the numerous missing persons. I'd worry about what to do next if and when they caught me. Besides, I'm sure Coyote has no problem digesting 10 stars. And we have a time jump. The girl I loved more than anything else in the world, except maybe my daughter, looked upon me longingly for answers. But I think she'd figured them out during my moment of self-reflection and silence. Being an intelligent woman, I'm sure she'd wondered all along why everyone else around me had mysteriously gone missing while I continued to bring more and more money home every Friday. We'd been able to buy 2 new horses and a covered wagon as well. No more rainy trips to and from the city for my darling bride. I even paid a few of the handier men in the thicket to add a second story to our house. Sure, everyone wondered how a railroad man was bringing in wealth of that caliber, but I didn't care in the slightest. At least I didn't think I did. Like I said, most of this last year was a complete blur. Coyote would know exactly what to do if any of them got too nosy. I noticed the exact moment when Victoria mentally put all the pieces of the puzzle together. A frown crossed her mouth, and fear of the unknown settled in her once soulful eyes. I waited on her to ask the inevitable. It didn't take long. "It was you, wasn't it?" my bride inquired. "You're the reason why everyone involved with the Red River Express has gone missing." I think that's my cue to have another drink of water. I haven't had alcohol in almost 4 years, I think. She seemed rather sure of herself, and instead of someone merely questioning the man they were supposed to love through thick and thin, sickness and in health, until death do they part, I could feel myself fading in and out of consciousness while I looked upon her troubled face. "And what if I am, my love?" She shuddered ever so slightly as I reached out to touch her shoulder in a display of confidence. It was easy to tell my loving wife was completely disgusted with my existence. Unsure of her next steps, Victoria mumbled a plea to the man who no longer possessed the will to forgive. "I'm sorry, dear. Could you repeat that?" I asked her for clarity. "If you did all these things, Jacobia, then you must turn yourself in. There's no other way." Of course there was. There was always another way. If there's anything my iron friend had taught me over the past few months, it's that a little fire and a lot of determination will take you far in life. It will take you even further in death. "I was afraid you'd say that," I whispered. The blacksmith hammer caught her off guard before she could even contest my absolution. It hit right on target to the temple of my bride's head. She immediately lost consciousness and fell into a crumpled mess on the ground below. I descended the ladder to begin what needed to be done. Taking her by the hair, I twisted ropes of it around my hand for ease of transport. Either she had the strongest scalp in the history of pale-faced women, or Chief Black Cat exaggerated the ease of performing this activity during many of his drunken tales of simpler, more barbaric times. No, she skid right along the dirt like she weighed next to nothing, leaving a trail of heel marks from her boots in her wake. Laying her atop the roundhouse rails, I slid her as closely as I could to Colonel James Fannon's cowcatcher and spread her legs so that they were embracing it. The point nestled into her groin. I couldn't help but think how peaceful Victoria looked as I posed her arms and legs. After all, weight-bearing was the proper key to all logistical tasks, and that body I'd ravaged oh so many times would be no different than the rails I'd ridden to and from our home we once cherished. She sprung wide awake with the first strike of the hammer atop the spike. Louder and louder her screams echoed throughout the roundhouse as I drove the railroad spike through her fragile flesh, on her hand, and into the splintered security of a wooden cross tie. She begged me to stop what she proclaimed was lunacy. But if there was one thing in this harsh world I couldn't comprehend, it was leaving a job partially finished. I ignored her nonsense and began fastening her other hand to the roundhouse floor. Blood splattered across the face of the locomotive, and it gave a deafening whistle of delight audible to anyone nearby. The demon knew its feast was nearing preparation. Little droplets of water escaped the boiler, leaving sizzles upon the chilled rail. The sound resembled the hungry smacks of a salivating dog beneath a hefty supper table. I finished with Victoria's hand when she somehow mustered the strength to kick the blacksmith's hammer from my grasp. In a strange sort of way, I'm glad she did it. It reminded me that I needed to nail her feet to the cross ties as well. The railroad spikes dulled as they drilled and fractured through bone, making it a ton more difficult to prevent my bride's potential escape. I had no choice but to hammer harder. I could hear her bargain with me after each new strike, but it was a chance I wasn't willing to take. She'd surely lead the law directly to my door if she managed to get away, and that was an option in which I showed little interest. I'm sure Coyote felt the same way. Victoria managed to pass out of consciousness from the pain after I'd bound her other foot to the tracks. I sat motionless for minutes as I watched her chest rise and fall with each labored breath. I reflected upon our short life together as I caressed her angelic face with my blood-soaked hands. A smear of crimson traced my motions of tenderness upon her cheeks, resembling the marks of a native warrior woman on the verge of the hunt. I laughed suddenly with the realization, but soon returned my composure. This was serious business after all, and I intended on finishing in time for tomorrow's cotton run. Nothing stops the Red River Express, not while I'm in charge. She screamed her way back to the land of the living the second the saw blade invaded the soft flesh beneath her armpit. Her back rose above the cross ties and ballast out of instinct, but those hands and feet of hers were going nowhere. Well, nowhere fast anyway. Her body smacked hard against the inescapable makeshift crucifix I'd affixed her to, making a dull-sounding thud with each useless attempt. Blood streamed from the edges of her mouth, and with it, her last reserves of energy. Exhaustion set in. Within seconds, her seizing ceased, and all signs of life left those once mesmerizing eyes. There were zero involuntary motions when I began sawing through her other arm. I mentally thanked her for being still. It was always so much easier when they were still. Coyote instantly came to life upon the death of its newest victim, my sweet Victoria Childress. The iron horse inched forward towards its prize spread legs, inserting the cowcatcher ever so gently deeper into the creases of the only true heaven I'd ever known. Then, with a guttural growl, the wheels of the locomotive lunged forward, and the cowcatcher wrenched her torso asunder. She split with the ease of a razor-sharp knife through a weathered, worn sheet from her pelvis to her pearly whites. No sound I'd ever experienced with my own ears resembled the moist, tearing audacity offered by her flesh in that moment. It was as if heaven and hell existed simultaneously within the same place. A cloud of opaque evil enveloped my bride and clung to her fresh like a skin-tight outfit on a saloon whore as I flung open the smoke-box door. Clumps of flesh, dirt, and debris lifted from the ground as the iron-bound entity sucked all scraps of bloody remains from the rails. Victoria's hands and feet stretched from the immeasurable strength of all the railroad spikes, but soon gave way to inevitability. They all ripped right down the middle before disappearing into the locomotive for all eternity. Suddenly, once the last drop of evidence faded to nothing, the engine returned to its dull metallic state. All was quiet once more. The demon would live to feast another day. Then, and only then, my full consciousness was brought back into focus. Tears gushed from my eyes as I wailed to the unseen heavens for forgiveness. It was too late, though. I'd seen it all go down helplessly through my own eyes, creating nightmares I'd carry with me until my dying breath. I'd managed to slaughter my own wife for the sake of continued success within my professional career. There was obviously a special place in hell for men like me. Then again, why would hell be such a bad place for someone willingly conducting the devil's work? And there's a time jump. I sat in silence within the confines of the cab of Colonel Fannon's fire... Pardon me. I sat in silence within the confines of the cab as Colonel Fannon's fire roared with satisfaction. I imagine the heat being generated was enough to roast the hair atop my head, yet it remained intact. Brushing my hand through it with a quickness to please my own sanity, I stood to face the darkness of the quiet roundhouse. It was that same quiet which returned my attention to the cries coming from the loft. In all the carnage going on at ground level, I'd somehow forgotten my own daughter laying atop the bunk, where her mother had tenderly placed her mere moments before her horrific demise. How would I explain the maternal absence once Honey became old enough to know such things? A smile, accompanied by an exhale, came on without warning, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for doing so. There was no way things would continue as planned once the people of Black Cat Thicket discovered the deeds I'd done. I half expected those Texas Rangers over at the church to come knocking at any moment. The smoke and fire peeking through the cracks of the old structure at such a late hour was a dead giveaway that all was not well. Ascending the ladder as sluggishly as possible, I placed my child into my shaking arms. The weight of a million woes seemed to hang loosely from my once sure shoulders, and I deserved every ounce of it. I looked deep into the eyes of the infant Honey Childers for any signs of hope, but I knew none existed. This poor child. She'd be raised by some other lucky soul, and they'd fail to mention the identities of her true parentage due to the murderous circumstances revolving around our misfortunes. Honey would never know the gentle touch of the mother who met her end at the hands of her maniac father. Sure, that father had the best of intentions in the beginning, but those intentions turned into nightmares before too long. No matter of money in all the cotton industry was worth the catastrophic frights of my reality. Then, a shock brought my brain functions to life, delivering an unexpected moment of clarity. Was the demon coyote truly confined to the innards of the steam locomotive? Colonel James Fannin was bound to the tracks which stretched between the gin and the river docks. If I was right, me and my sweet Honey child could make a run for it, leaving the influence of the murderous being behind for all eternity, or at least until the men with guns caught up to us on the run. Who truly knew how long it would be before they located our whereabouts? It was a chance I was willing to take at this point. Cuddling my child in the crook of my one arm, I descended the ladder with the stealth of a serpent on the hunt. Slowly I made my way across the tracks to the tail end of the engine's tender and blazed a straight path for the roundhouse side door. Coyote was having none of it. Going somewhere, Mr. Childers? I knew it would have been too damn easy to simply walk away from my supernatural obligations, but it was worth a try. Give me a moment. Little coffee burps, yay. I gripped my child tighter against the devilish offensive destined to envelop us. I knew what the demon was truly capable of. I prayed it would save Honey's life, or at least offer her a sudden, painless demise. Yeah, actually, I responded, I was going to take the baby home for a fresh diaper and some more milk. The demon huffed in the form of escaping smoke through the engine stack. The iron on the smokebox door crinkled like the skin of a scorned, disappointed face. Eyes of flame accompanied the entity's manipulation inside the headlight. Fear immediately gripped my feet, halting any plans of escape. It's odd that you say such things, Mr. Childress, Coyote explained. Just as you have witnessed bits of my world through our pairing, I have gotten to know most of yours. Humans smell of death when they soil themselves, and your darling child never imbibes sustenance at such a late hour. If I didn't know any better, I think you were about to make a run for it. Absolutely not, I lied. It's that my child no longer has a mother, and I'm truly her only hope of life now. I need to act with responsibility and haste to keep her alive. How destiny falls solely on me, you see. Or her destiny falls solely on me, you see. Colonel Fannin rose from its home along the tracks and crossed its guide wheels with a deafening meeting of metal. The paranormal wonders of the demon's ability caused the iron beast to morph into a human-like entity. As of this moment, it looked upon me like a judging parent on the verge of doling out a punishment. Then Coyote's outer shell stretched to that of a mischievous, haunting grin. I feared any words which would accompany such a devious physical demeanor. "It's a shame, Mr. Childress, that your child has become such a troublesome burden upon us both. It would appear as though I have no choice but to remedy you of this hardship." With that, the same fog that had sealed my sweet Victoria's fate descended upon my head, blurring the lines between reality and blind obedience. My feet slid through the loose dirt of the roundhouse floor and pointed once more in the direction of the locomotive. Coyote again straddled the tracks upon which he rested and blew his firebox door wide open. The flames roared even hotter than those of the most difficult hours during a railroading summer and leapt frantically along the edges of its iron housing. I couldn't stop myself. The invisible hands commanding my legs to march in the direction of such a heinous act refused to release their grip. Now inside the engine's cab again, the toxic mixture of steam and smoke burned my eyes and choked my throat like a mischievous child's first secret cigar. There was no holding back the tears now flowing like rivers from both my eyes in the opaque, polluted confines of the building. It was no surprise when my last remnants of love upon this earth were pulled from my helpless arms and into the torturous fires of hell themselves. Honey's tiny body encountered no resistance as she fit through the watch-hole and into a flame-engulfed oblivion. She made not a sound as she did so. I paused my advance, falling to my knees atop the filthy footplate below the boiler. I had nothing else to live for except pleasing the demon who'd been ravaging my sanity for many seasons. Coyote made damn sure of that. And then we have a time jump. Fire. I see it as both a curse and a blessing since the day the good Lord bestowed it upon us with his infinite wisdom. We use it to heat our lives during periods of winter, cook our meals during times of hunger, and to dispose of bodies during times of mourning. Then again, a blessing to one man is often a curse upon another. God is funny like that, and those jokes come in various shapes, forms, and familiarities. Fuck God. For every dark, there is a light. For every high, there is a low. For every God, there is an entity to encounter the goodness of his or her existence. Is it really all goodness, though? Good and bad are a point of view, and it depends solely on which side of the Bible you sit on. In my case, it would be the steel rails and splintered wood of the railroad cross ties. Those men outside have been knocking on that door for what seems like hours. Why don't they bust it down or burn the place to the ground, bringing this entire fiasco to the end it deserves? I'll tell you why. It's the monetary value associated with such things. This railroad is worth a lot of money, and it's probably changed hands since the sudden death of Cornelius Parks. It's always been about the money, hasn't it? If it wasn't, I'd never know the likes of the demon Coyote, and I'd be home in the comfy embrace of my late wife and child. I'd be jobless, broke, and starving, but at least I'd have them. Money can fill any valley in a coward's backbone, but legends are paid with hellfire and blood. You can't put value on love. My own desperation clouded my vision of right and wrong long ago. I may have never been the smartest man who braved the brambles and thorns of Black Cat Thicket, but at least I was honest. I was never on track to be a rich man or even a man who tended to mimic such individuals. Instead, the Lord sucked me dry of blood and sweat in return for a day's wages. In the end, what's eviler? The demon who inhabited the Colonel James Fannin, or the money that led me to his front door in the first place? The offensive smell of burned flesh no longer fills my senses as I sit upon an empty apple crate before the near silent dancing fires of the locomotive. Coyote is inside of there somewhere, but he doesn't dare show his face as of this moment. He doesn't have to. There's no denying that the world in which I barely exist now belongs to him. No pun intended. The burning question I'm faced with is whether I'm willing to remain a slave to his desires. There is nothing about me that feels human anymore. Even the breaths I breathe feel numbered, and those numbers dwindle with every knock and holler of the authorities gathering strength outside the roundhouse door. Will they be able to see the evil machine for what it truly is once they gain access? Or will they assume they found their culprit once I'm taken into custody? There's no way I'd be so lucky as to make them understand. Most men who ramble on about such things spend the rest of their lives in a dark, forgotten room, screaming to a deaf deity for supernatural leg up in the situation. Personally, I bore witness to enough goddamn screaming for one lifetime, and I could use a bit of a rest. My face inched closer to the sensual flames of the engine's firebox, this time erasing clumps of hair from my head with its intense, suffocating heat. The front of my blood-soaked shirt followed suit, and I jammed my shoulders as far as I could into the same opening which had devoured the bones of my unforgettable victims. With any luck, I'll recognize the faces of my loved ones in a land spoke of by Sunday preachers and snake oil salesmen alike. I hope they find it within their hearts to forgive me. The pain of the flesh-melting flames no longer tortures my senses as imagined in my darkest of nightmares. If this is all death entails, then perhaps the punishment inflicted upon my troubled soul wouldn't be so bad. My name was Jacobia Childress, and it's about time I witnessed hell with my own two eyes. And that was Hellfire and Blood! Seriously. That, to me, is one of my most favorite things I ever wrote. I used every bit of my knowledge from working on a narrow gauge railroad. It was my very short-lived dream job. That was a long one. I hope you made it. I hope you stuck with me. Don't forget, you can get your own copy of Haunted Spaghetti at RevDareCloud.com or on Amazon. I have some in stock. I can get them out to you the same day. They'll be autographed. All that good stuff. But anyway, that's a hard story. That's a hard story to listen to. A hard story to read. I don't mean hard as in the way it was written. I just mean that's a hard story, man. I love it, though. Preach truth, toke joke, shoplift, Amazon. To those of you who made it this far, I love you guys. Pass this off to someone in your life who you think might like it. I could use some more readers. Y'all have a good one.